Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome back, and thanks again for joining us in our sales leadership podcast with Wajid and Simon. My name is Simon Rodriguez, and we look forward to sharing with you some of the best practices and some of the latest experiences and some of the things we have been going through in our journey in the sales space industry. And we certainly want to focus today on talking about communication. Communication, obviously, is paramount, not only sales, but in general, our professional lives. And we're going to talk about what are those key pointers, those top 10 things that we should focus on in terms of communication and why that's so important. So before we get into the topics, I want to introduce you to Wajid, obviously, to get things started. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Wajid.
Hey, hello everyone. Thanks, Simon. Thank you for laying the foundation for this episode today. As Simon said, we are going to talk about communication and how important and critical it is when it comes to sales. In our previous podcast, we did touch upon it. We got some good feedback, and some of the feedback was to take a deep dive into communication. So we'll be exploring it in next two or three sessions starting from today. So this one is the first one as we go. My name is Wajid Ali. I'm based out of in Toronto, Canada, and we are here to help you become a better salesperson. So let's start with this, Simon. What is it that you've got, and how would you like to start on this topic today?
Excellent. Thanks, Wajid. And as you said, I think communication again is essential, is paramount when it comes to relationships and building those trusting relationship in sales. And that's actually point number one. So point number one that we have today is why communication and proper communication can help us build those long-lasting, trusted relationship with our prospect, our customers. And the thing is that when we have a clear and empathetic communication approach in the long run, that will help us build that connection, that long lasting relationship with our prospect, ultimately becoming customers in the long run. So that's kind of the first topic that we wanted to brought up and share with you. And I wanted to start also asking you, Wajid, like in your experience and from your perspective, I mean, what are the key things or challenges that people oftentimes face when it comes to building those initial relationships and ensuring that they are defined for kind of a long-term relationship? What are your thoughts around that, building that trust and relationships?
Yeah, Simon, thank you for bringing this one up. I think it's the kind of the paramount when it comes to communication is building the trust and relationship. And how do you build it is by being yourself, being authentic, um, and share your genuine feeling with your potential prospect or customer, right? Most of the time when people come into the sales field, especially if they're new into this world, they kind of feel overwhelmed. They feel like they have to perhaps portray somebody else or another personality. That's how it feels. They kind of feel overwhelming. So for those people who are listening here, if you're new into sales, or if you're tenured but you are facing challenges with communication, my first advice to all of you would be just be yourself, because remember, you're talking to another human being, right? You're talking to another person. Always remember that no matter what the title or the person you're talking to, remember, before anything, they're just humans, right? So the way you talk to your, let's take a step back, and it's kind of similar analogies. The way you talk to your family members openly and transparently, it's very much similar to the way you would talk to your customers and prospects. And if you start talking in that way, where we can portray that you're genuine, you're open, you're transparent, you're honest, and you are on the side of the customer, you are actually trying to help them and not trying to sell on them, right? Because there is a fine balance when it comes to communication. I'll take a pause here because there's a lot of things I can go long and long, and I think we both can go on just this one topic. But let's take a pause and see what are your reflections on this one.
Certainly we did, and thanks for sharing that perspective. I concur that is being like spontaneous and having that genuine connection is what ultimately helps build that relationship. And I'll just add to that note, to in terms of trust and relationship, is leveraging active listening. And I know that's something that we have talked about briefly, but again, it is kind of a stress, again, the importance of being an active listener, right? And using that perspective of, or that approach of understanding the prospect, the customer perspective, understanding their needs, their values, what are the things that are driving their decisions. So showing that genuine care, right? Like understanding from that perspective how you can help them accomplish a particular objective or specific objective they have. So I think that's a good summary for the first topic. And curious about the next one, because it's although it's something we take for granted, that okay, it's, and the point is understanding customer needs. Although we take it for granted, like yes, of course we need to know the customer needs before we propose a solution, but it's oftentimes overlooked, like not having, let's say, the proper open-ended questions, the proper discovery process to get all the
Mhm.
information that we need to include in the decision making process with the customer, right? Understanding their buying criteria, their current needs, and ultimately you can prescribe, or you can define or tailor a solution based on those needs or those drivers. But yeah, I wanted to get your thoughts on that point. With you, is what's your take on understanding the customer needs from that perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, before I answer to this one, I guess it's very connected to the last comment that you made on our
Yeah,
previous topic, which was active listening, right? So if you're actively listening to what is being said, meaning that if you're present in the moment, you're focused, you're trying, you're listening in order to understand. I think this is very important for you, and it will allow you as a salesperson, as a sales leader, it will allow you to understand the customer needs. But for that, you need to become active listener. I think you really kind of summarize it really well when we were closing the first topic, which is the key, which is the active listening piece of it, right? And most of us, what happens is when we go into the meeting rooms, it could be virtual or in person. For some reason, perhaps we lack that ability of active listening. On our mind is all of the time. On our mind is how I can communicate my message, how I can communicate what I'm here for, without thinking of how important it is to listen to the customer. Because when you actively listen to your customer, you are in a better position to understand and tailor your proposition. And keep in mind that you cannot help 100% of the time, although you're trying to help, but you may not be able to, meaning that the product or the solution or the service that you're bringing to the table might not be always suitable to what your customer is trying to achieve. But how would you end up learning that whole thing is by actively listening to what is being said at the moment, right? And I think this answers to your question as well. In order to understand the customer needs is, of course, you need to do the customer exploration. You need to do the account studies from which account you're focused on. You have to do some research, some web research, some networking research. But at the same time, when you're in front of the customer, make sure that you're actively listening to what is being said at the moment.
certainly we did. And I will add, actually, which is I think is quite interesting, is, and I like to add that what's being said and also what's not being said, because it's part also about reading that room, or reading the environment, or reading that the customer environment, right? Because oftentimes we might see that there are things that are being shared, but sometimes you can get insights even from the things that the customer is not sharing, right, or what is not being shared or said at that particular moment. So I think that's something important, and that will give you, by improving your active listening skills, that will give you that capability to be able to understand what's being shared, what is not being shared, and gather those insights, and to your point, to ultimately build that or tailor that solution that's going to help that customer. I think it goes back to kind of the analogy we were discussing in the last session about prescribing and diagnosing, right? Is we cannot jump to prescribing before having a clear diagnosis about the situation, the obviously the environment, and what the issue, the problem is. And I think that's why it's so important to have those open discussions, and gather as much information as we can. And through active listening, we can be, or we can position ourselves to be the trusted advisor. So I think that's the main thing. Now I think this is
Yeah,
all interconnected,
that's
right? I
right.
think that's all building upon each other, which I think is kind of
Yeah,
the main.
Simon, the point that you mentioned about the understanding what is not being said is again a skill, right? All these things
Yeah,
comes with practice, right? Now, if you're starting as a new person, you wouldn't be, call it, trained enough, or you don't have you're not experienced enough where you can understand all these nuances. But if you have a tenured person on your team, if you have a mentor who you can look up to and talk to, all these things that we are kind of sharing here is a knowledge that is already available out there. You just need to find the right person to sit with and get the insights from them, and how then you can utilize those insights towards your benefit, and more towards the benefit of the customer. And one thing which is important is the questioning, right? How do you, when
agreed.
you're sitting with your customer or with your clients, in order to understand their needs, you need to be able to ask questions. And what kind of questions do you ask? How do you explore that process? Do you have a process in place? Do you have a set of questions that could help you identify or diagnose, to your point,
Mm.
uh, problem that the customer is facing, right? So all these things that we are sharing here is actually to help the audience, but also at the same time to remind ourselves that all these things are important. When you're in meeting room, we kind of take these things for granted. I totally agree with you.
Yeah, and I think that's key to back your insights on the importance of not only listening but having those proper questions in place. With it, I think it ties back to the third topic we have, which is articulating value, right? And that's why I really like the approach, because it's kind of a build on the previous skill, and this third one is about articulating value. And as you have obviously customer insights, as you went through those questions, as you said, and you're gathering those objectives from the customers, understanding their environment. Now you're in a position to present your value proposition, tailor or define to that customer environment. So I think that's the third point that we wanted to share today, is how can you articulate value from those previous discussions you already had, right? And that's, we hear this a lot about value proposition. Okay, you always lead with your value prop, but it doesn't, you need to ensure that the value proposition, it's going to resonate with the customer. And the best way to do that is by having that intel, that information, those insights from the customer, so you can align your value proposition with those customer drivers. And I know this is something that it's actively used, but we need to use it properly, in my opinion, the value prop. So what's your take, Wajid, on value proposition? I know it's kind of a jargon we use frequently, right? We need to lead with our VP, with our value proposition of services, products. But what's your take on that, and how important it is to properly articulating that value prop?
I think it's essential on without having an effective and to the point tailored value proposition, it's really hard to be a successful salesperson. So, I will kind of close it in one statement here, because I'm just kind of looking at the time. But what I would suggest here is focus on the outcomes, right? So what is it that the customer is looking for? What outcomes they are trying to achieve? So when you're defining you or describing your value proposition, make sure that those outcomes are captured in your value proposition and it's not missed or overlooked. And by doing so, it shows that you have actively listened and understood the customer needs, and now you're coming with an effective and efficient value proposition. I think we can wrap it up here, Simon. Any parting thoughts, and then we will just call it a day.
Yeah, certainly. I think it was a good discussion, and I think that's a good summary with the value prop and the importance of outcome driven decision making. And we appreciate again the time, and we look forward to the next session. Thanks everyone for joining.